Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers, and welcome to this Development Control Committee meeting on the 6th of April. First, for your greater safety, I will read out the fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. I should also tell you that this meeting is being webcast and that it's working. Thank you. It makes a change. And please can everyone switch off their mobile phones or turn them to silent. Thank you. Apologies, turning to the agenda now, apologies for absence and substitutions. We have Councillor Miller replacing Councillor Tucker. Do I have any declarations of interest, members? No? Thank you. Urgent matters, we do have, Mr. Townsend, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This is just to confirm that the Council has today received the Local Plan Inspector's report. Officers are reviewing the content of that report and will be reporting any implications to members in due course. The receipt of the Local Plan Inspector's report could alter the weight to be applied to policies of the emerging local plan and may have implications for the Council's housing land supply position. For these reasons, items number 1 for Leamington Court and the associated listed building consent application for item 2, item 5 for Crowshot Park Farm, and item 10 for land to the rear of Greenacres have been withdrawn from the agenda for tonight's committee meeting to allow for consideration as to whether there is any material impact on the reports or the recommendations. For those applications where housing land supply position in particular could be material to the decision-making process. All efforts have been made to contact those who have been registered to speak on those items this evening. For the remainder of the agenda items, the update paper confirms the reasons why the receipt of the Local Plan Inspector's report does not alter the recommendation as listed.
Thank you, Mike. So if there's anybody here expecting to talk about items 1, 2, 5 and 10, you can go home. Thank you. For the benefit of the members of public attending, I'd just like to explain who everybody around this table is. My name is Councillor Donald Sherlock, and I'm the chairman of this committee, and Councillor Leake is the deputy chairman. Down the sides of the table to the left and right are the councillors who sit on this committee and who will be making the decisions on the applications this evening. Immediately to my left and right are the officers who will be advising councillors. In addition, I would like to explain that the Development Control Committee is a regulatory committee and not a political meeting. The committee will be looking at the evidence brought before it tonight and will make its decisions based on planning reasons. We are guided by national and local guidance and policy. I do understand that planning can be emotive, and I ask that everyone remains polite and professional throughout the evening. And may I ask all speakers, including visiting members, to speak clearly and to return to their seats once their presentation is complete. No further dialogue between members of the committee and speakers will be permitted once questioning has finished. And finally, may I ask all committee members to avoid repetition, and I ask them to keep any comments on each item to a maximum of 4 minutes. Thank you. We now move to item 4. We've done urgent matters. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of March. You've got some, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to bring members' attention to one correction to those minutes. On page 23, members may note that the sequence of conditions for that planning application goes 11 to 13. Unfortunately, condition 12, which is relating to a tree protection condition, should have been referred to as well. So with members' agreement, it would include that condition in the minutes for signing.
Agreed.
Do you agree that I sign these minutes? Thank you. Right, we move on to item 5, applications for planning permission and public participation thereon. And items 1 and 2 are deleted, therefore we go straight to item 3. which is 8 Test Road, Whitchurch, Hampshire. And I did have Andy Jordan of the Whitchurch Town Council, but I believe he's not now speaking. Sorry, are you speaking instead of him? Are you the applicant? Sorry? She is. That's all right. Okay, Mrs. Old, and that's all. Just wait. Robert Sims will introduce it. Thank you. Both sit down.
Thank you, Chair. The first item is 8 Test Road, Whitchurch, and proposal for the erection of a replacement fence and its retention. Members should note that this proposal relates to the front boundary fence only, as opposed to the side fencing, which you'll see on the photos. So it's for the front boundary only. In terms of the updates, a couple of updates for you. So, summary of the viewing panel and what we saw, and including the reference to a photograph of what was previously the front boundary treatment. That will be shown on the slides. An update on the planning policy position following the local planning inspector's report, and a summary of a further representation received from the applicant via the town council, which you can all read for yourselves. The application is recommended for refusal and subsequent enforcement action, either for the reduction in height to 1 metre or the removal of all the fencing, making good all affected services within a period of 2 months from the date of this notice.
Thank you, Robert. Mr. and Mrs. Old, can you, just for the sake of the microphones, just confirm who you are?
Mary Old is my name. Mary Old is my name.
Thank you. Right, you will have 4 minutes to speak, and I'll give you a minute's notice towards the end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. As it was no longer viable for my husband and I to maintain the hedge, our hedge, due to age and declining health, our only option we had was to erect a fence, the same height as our existing hedge. In doing so, we incurred great expense. As to OAPs, it is not feasible for us to have fence changed. We would incur further costs, therefore it is not financially viable for us to do so. As illustrated in our letter, other fences on Test Road are the same height. Ours is approximately 18 inches inside our boundary. That's all.
Anything else?
That's it.
That's it. Thank you. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. and Mrs. Old? Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Old. Can I just ask you, were you aware that you should have had planning permission to put that fence up?
We were not aware, and neither was a gentleman's company that put it there. When I told him after the event, months later on, he was quite surprised.
Yeah.
And he does that job for a living.
Sorry, can I just add, please, that as it was on our land and our boundary, and it was going up, actually our hedge was actually further out on towards the road. Now that the fence is up, it is more in on our land. So it has actually made a wider area between the road and our fence now. Next door's hedge is going out on the road where people used to park, but because they didn't trim it back, nobody ended up parking there, and the Benmen complained because they couldn't get up Test Road. The county council or the highways people came out and put a white line around that, so nobody parks there at all now. People only park at our fence. And as people can see, who went out last Friday to have a look, you can see the state of the ground where our boundary is. Prior to that, our hedge was completely dismantled because people were parking in the hedge, opening car doors and banging them into the hedge, which was completely gone. Literally.
All right, thank you. Any more questions, members? No? Thank you both very much. You may go back to your seats.
Thank you.
Members, questions to officers? Councillor Leeks.
I don't mind which picture is that one or the other one. Am I right in saying that that is the only fence of that height along there on the front, not the side, the front, to officers?
Yes, that's correct. So there's a few examples that we've seen on the slides and what the applicant points out, but they relate to side boundaries as opposed to a principal front elevation, which where this fence would be is situated. So that's where the objection comes from, in a sense that it's an inappropriate form of fence that's on a front boundary, which is not seen within the area.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Bound.
If the applicants were to reduce the height, what would be the height? What would be an acceptable height for the fence?
Yeah, so they can go up to 1 metre without needing planning permission. Anything above metre is what we consider as part of an application. But the two options are, as we pointed out, is to either reduce it down to that 1 metre, thus not requiring planning permission, or to take it away completely and put another form of boundary treatment in.
Right, members. Obviously, no more questions to officers. Let us have debate. Can somebody lead it off, please? Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I have to say I do have considerable sympathy with the applicant, and I note that Whitchurch Town Council have no objections and Highways have no objections, but in the circumstances, I will be happy to hear what everybody else has to say on this. But at the same time, I do feel that that we probably should support the officers on this one, and that planning permission should have been applied for, and with some reluctance that at this moment in time, until I hear what other people say, that would be my view. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other views? Councillor Bound.
Yeah, I think I would basically agree with what Councillor Godson said. That with reluctance, I would agree with the officer recommendation. They do have a side fence that we noted on the site visit, I think, which was probably about 1 metre in height, and presumably that could be taken down to that sort of height as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Do I have any proposals?
Well, in the circumstances, I'm willing to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
And I'll second the proposal.
Thank you. Right, I have a proposal for refusal. Those in favour, raise your hands. Those against? Abstentions? 1. That vote is carried. Thank you. Robert, will you sum up? Thank you.
Yep, so the application was refused and enforced in accordance with the officer recommendation on page 111.
Thank you. We now move to item number 4. Which is Ringshaw, the street in Bramley. I have speakers. Mr. Barnes and Councillor Robinson. And it will be introduced by Catherine Fitzherbert Green. Thank you.
Thank Thank you, Chairman. This application is for the erection of a two-storey side and front extensions to the existing dwelling, together with single-storey front extension to form an entrance porch, and the erection of a new boundary fence and entrance gates, creating new access onto the highway of the street. If I first bring members' attention to the update paper, you will note that there is reference to the current planning policy situation and further information that was requested by members at the viewing panel in relation to the increases in size of the proposal against the existing dwelling. This application is recommended for refusal as per the reasons set out on page 118 of your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes, would you like to come and sit down? And you will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in favour of the proposed development at Rings Hall. My name is Chris Barnes, and I'm the agent for the application. This application was submitted for planning approval in September of last year. In the past 6 months, there have been many discussions with the planning team and attempted revisions to resolve the issues that they have. This has been unsuccessful, as witnessed by its inclusion in tonight's agenda. There are two main reasons for the recommended refusal, and I will try to address each of these. Firstly, a vehicular access is proposed onto the street. This would be a shared existing access to the street that is currently used by the adjacent neighbour, Rose Mullion, and likely to account for an average of only 4 additional traffic movements per day. The reason for refusal is stated as: inadequate sight lines would cause undue interference with the safety and convenience of users of the adjoining highway. The sight lines from the driveway are generally the same as those from Rings Hall Garden, the owner's current access point to the street, and access point for the whole of that road. Those councillors who attended the site visit will have seen for themselves the open view from the access point, and I'm sure would agree, as some did on the day, that the sight lines were good. Given this, I see no reason for refusal on the grounds of access. Secondly, the proposed two-storey side extensions are deemed unacceptable due to their lack of subservience to the main dwelling. I would agree that in a large number of applications, it is quite right that an extension should be subservient to the main dwelling. I do not believe this is the case in this instance. Rings Hall is an individual property in a street of individual properties. As such, the proposed extensions will not look out of place with the host dwelling or out of place within the street scene. Council guidance states, in particular, the basic shape of the extension should be subservient and in proportion to the original building. However, it is recognised that in some circumstances it may not be appropriate to design an extension which is truly subservient to the original building. Over the course of the application, I have looked at various options for this site with subservient extensions. I strongly believe that this is one of those circumstances where subservience detracts from the property and as a result from the overall street scene. In terms of the property size, the extensions I believe are in proportion, extending to 2.75 metres to either side, flush at the rear, and extending 2.4 metres forward. As a final comment, I would like to mention the neighbours. The owner had, prior to submission, discussed the application with neighbouring properties. As a result of this collaboration, the 5 nearest properties have not objected to the application. The adjacent neighbour at Rose Mullion, who is likely to be most affected by this application, has actually written in support of it.
1 minute.
And the owners of number 20 to the southern boundary have revised their initial objection to one of support once some landscaping issues were clarified. In total, 5 letters of support have been received. Thank you for your time, and I would ask that you look favourably on this application and grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Any questions for Mr. Barnes? Councillor Westbrook. Councillor Potter.
Good evening, Mr. Barnes. The report highlights issues that obviously one of the main reasons for refusal is the vehicular access. Our report mentions that the highways officer has got material highway safety concerns raised by them for adverse impacts on the proposed access are considered to be significant and demonstrable. But it goes on to say that I would guess after some of the amendments, they said there may be, if there was another consultation taken, that could maybe resolve it. But it says that the amended plans received did not materially change the design of the proposed vehicular access. And I'm just wondering why there was no attempt to try and change what was there, which the highway officer was unhappy with.
Okay, as you'll see from the site plan and parking plan up there, there is very, very limited frontage onto the street, and the aim was to try and come out of the property and onto the existing driveway from Rose Mullion. So rather than creating an additional access route onto the street, we were going to use exactly the one that was there, cutting across the side of his driveway, joining his driveway, and then going onto the street where the existing driveway already remains. There wasn't much scope to reposition either the existing driveway or the access through there, but what we did do is we worked on clarifying the boundary changes and where the gates were going to go.
Councillor Potter?
Hello, Mr. Barnes. Just in regard to the issues around subservience, my calculations suggest this is something like a 65–70% increase in regard to the 1949 property that exists there. Would you accept those calculations?
Without having the benefit of being able to sit here and work it out, I would accept it's probably around that size. However, what I would say is when you actually look at the width of the property, it hasn't increased significantly. Some of it is side extensions, and what we've done is squared it up and, in my opinion, made what is quite a plain house look a lot more attractive on the street scene.
The second point, if I may, in regard to the letters of support that have been put in, I don't know whether you organise them, but you obviously know of them. Do you accept they're virtually identical, and on that basis we're entitled to take them as just one single letter of support?
I think there was the support letters have nothing to do with me. I don't send letters out to anybody asking them to sign them and return them. I think what was done is in the consultation that the owner of the property was quite keen that everybody supported his application if they wished to, and to try and simplify the matter. I think what he did, probably incorrectly in hindsight, was printed out some letters that he asked people if they were happy that they would sign. But yes, the letters were written centrally, but they were signed by the individuals and they were submitted by the individuals because they were happy to submit them. So I would say no. If you phoned up each of those individual people, they would support the application.
Thank you. Any more questions, members? In that case, thank you, Mr. Barnes. Councillor Robinson. You will have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, everybody. Firstly, I have been in touch with legal services here at the council, and they have advised me that I don't have to declare an interest in this case. However, for reasons of clarity, I would like it to be known that my son does work for the house owner. So everybody is now aware of that. Ringshaw is an individual detached house in a varied street scene of mostly large houses. The proposed extension does replicate the original design in accordance with Basingstoke and Dean planning guidelines. The officer recommends refusal on the grounds that the extension is not subservient. Basingstoke planning guidelines recognise that lack of subservience is not always an appropriate reason for refusal. Many other properties in Bramley, in the immediate vicinity of this house, have had non-subservient extensions. The officer also recommends refusal on the grounds of overbearance to the neighbouring house, Rose Mullion. This neighbour has written a letter of support for the application and is happy to share his drive access. When I questioned this with the officer, I was told it could be overbearing on future occupiers of Rose Mullion. Surely this is for prospective future buyers to consider when viewing the property. There are 2 letters of support for this application from the immediate neighbours, and the letters of objection come from more distant ones. The initial objection from Bramley Parish Council and from Councillor Tomlin were concerned only with the proposed access. These were withdrawn when the access was redesigned to share the existing pavement crossing with Rosemullion. Those of you who visited the site on Friday will have seen the excellent sight lines from the proposed access, which is in a 30-mile-an-hour speed restriction and allows entrance and exit safely in forward gear. I believe that this proposal will create a high-quality family home for the applicant and will enhance the current street scene without any detrimental effect to the village or the neighbouring properties. I therefore recommend it for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have any members, any questions for Councillor Robinson? Councillor Potter.
Hello, Councillor Robinson. Thank you for making the declaration at the beginning. I think it's always wise, isn't it, to err on the side of caution. Obviously, you make mention of the fact you made that declaration because your son, Tristan, works for the applicant. Are you able to confirm who the applicant is, please?
The advice I have received... Sorry.
Can I interrupt? I'm told that's not relevant to the application in front of us.
Can I seek further advice on this then, really? I mean, it's not unusual, obviously, for any of us to refer to the applicant. If I refer to the applicant by name, what happens to me?
Slightly odd question for me to have to answer here. All our advice would be that in this particular instance, an application has been made. The applicant is listed as Yateley Drawing Service Limited, and to refer to anyone else is immaterial to this. It's irrelevant. All we're interested in are the planning merits of this particular case and whether it would be approved or not.
Believe it or not, pursue this to the point of exhaustion, but in just about every other planning application I can remember, I mean, there are agents listed, the applicant is listed, there is no... I've never come across this before, and I'm just intrigued why, on this occasion, the applicant's name wouldn't appear, and why we should be restricted in talking about that applicant. I genuinely mean that, and I've never come across this before. What's the background to that?
Chair, if I can insist as much as possible, my understanding is that there are reasons as to why in this instance the applicant wasn't listed, and my understanding of the requirements is that effectively the applicant can be stated as being an agent in this regard. Unfortunately, Chair, I'm not able to go any further on that on this particular occasion, but the application has been accepted as a valid application.
My last comment then, Chair, genuinely, because I don't want to take it too far, but I mean, obviously everybody around this table knows who Councillor Robinson's son works for, so clearly, although the name can't be spoken, we all know who that is, and so we'll proceed with this application this evening. But thank you for that. Very intriguing situation, really. I don't quite know what he seeks to be protected from. Possibly me, but I doubt that.
Do I have any other questions for Councillor Robinson? No? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. No more speakers. Members' questions to officers? Councillor Goodison, followed by Councillor Westbrook, followed by Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask our highways officer, you state here objection to proposed access due to increased risk and hazard, etc., and then go on. The proposed shared crossing is substandard in terms of width for a shared access. Might I ask you two questions? Firstly, what should the shared access be for you to be happy to accept it as a shared access? And if it were that width, would you still be objecting on highway grounds? Thank you.
I think it's a case of two wrongs don't make a right, Councillor. The existing access is too close to the junction, according to the County Council standards. So even if the access was widened, it wouldn't be acceptable. The width for a shared access we would be looking for would be 4.1 metres minimum, which the current design isn't.
Right, Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. Along those lines, really, I asked Mr Barnes about the not making any more changes to it other than what he suggested. He gave the impression by moving a few gateposts and maybe changing it, that would be enough for it to satisfy you. I'm not sure if that's what your view is, actually. If you could give me that, please.
What we see now is an alteration from what was originally submitted, where the proposals now for a shared access were originally, it was showing a separate access closer to the junction than the existing. The concern is that, as you can see from the diagrams, that the width of the verge is only 4.7 metres. It's roughly the length of a car. What's proposed is a convoluted S-turn within that distance for a car to come out of the Ringshall site and use the shared access to Rosemullion. I think in reality, if that access was permitted, the occupier and visitors would find it much easier not to use a Rosemullion access, but to start using and creating their own crossing across the verge.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to go through the iteration in a slightly different angle here. Is the first part of my question is there anything wrong with the positioning of the existing Rosemullion access in relation to the junction of the road?
Just as I said earlier, yes, to the County Council standards for an access, it should be no closer than 15 metres from the junction. It's roughly 7 metres.
Then I would have to come back and say, why hasn't some kind of enforcement action been taken by the County Council for that access to be moved? Now, without this planning application, if it breaks the rules now, which I would imagine they're broken all over the country because the rules have changed as we've gone on in the passing of years. Okay, I accept two wrongs don't make a right, but it's been accepted over the passage of time that that access is acceptable and safe, because I don't know if there have been any reported accidents there, because that's the measure that the highways make as to whether anything in the highway is dangerous or not. So I can assume, using that argument, that highways consider the current access to Rosemullion to be a safe access. Notwithstanding, the rules say it should be another 6 metres further on, or 6 or 7 metres further on, 8 metres actually.
I can't give you a history lesson because I don't know when the Ringshall Gardens was developed, but Ringshall Gardens was developed after the access for Rosemullion was already there. So it's a bit of the other way around in reality, but I think it was 30 plus years ago the County Council didn't state that requirement for the junction separation at that time. And they haven't taken retrospective action, I accept that.
But would you also accept my argument that with the revised diagrams, as far as I can understand, is that nobody's asking for that current accepted access to be changed in any way? It's only internal over, I'm not quite sure whose land that is, I assume it's Ringshall's land, with an agreement with the owner of Rosemullion that he could access that the access onto the highway on private land and nothing to do with highways. Is that true?
All of the land beyond the red line, so where the image of the car is making the sort of the sharp right, that is all highway verge. So as I said, 4.7 metres from the boundary of Ringshall, and then another 1.7 metres of footway beyond that.
Thank you. I understand that now.
Any more questions, members? Councillor Potter, sorry.
Going away from the vehicle access bit just for a minute and talking about the property itself, which I do know. Surprise, surprise, I guess, but I do know, and obviously have passed by it on occasions. In regard to the letters of support that were written, all of them being identical, as I've said, it's actually said by them, the supporters, Rings Hall is a character property in Bramley dating back to 1949. I mean, I genuinely don't know what character property means. Does the planning officer have any idea beyond what I would interpret that to be?
I don't have any formal definition of what a characterful property would be. I would just draw members' attention to the character and appearance of the area as you saw it on the site viewing and the photos that you have before you. This is an individual property. It sits next to a bungalow on one side, which is Rose Mullion. It sits next to Ringsall Gardens on the other, which are later chalet bungalows. So there is a mix, but I say the character of the property is, what you see before you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Then let us move to debate. Anyone? Councillor Hood, followed by Councillor Bound.
I have listened very carefully to this. Sorry. Thank you. Last time I did this, David, I poked me in it, so be careful. Yes, I've listened to the debate, and I mean, listen to what the officer said with highways. I think we'd be very foolish to ignore that. I think the principle is there in the right place. I think we speak a lot about Bramley and how tight things are, and they are tight in Bramley. But I think because of weight and because of highway issues, I would move refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll go along with Councillor Hood on the highways issue. However, in terms of the house, I think actually, to my mind, the extensions improve the look of the house, but because of the width that they create within the space available, I think it's too big and too bulky for the space that in the way that it's taking up that space there. But I do think that it actually improves the look of the house. I would second Councillor Hood's.
Thank you. Anyone else want to? Councillor Westbrook.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, after going on the site view, it is, even though the neighbour's quite happy in Rose Mullion, I mean, it's quite overpowering that side of the property. And on the other side, it extends fully right up to as far as it can possibly go, removing all the hedgerow. I mean, I think it's one of those subjective things, isn't it? I mean, if you were to put this property in a big field, you'd probably think it was great, but it's the full width of that plot, and it's very tight on site. So I would say I'm not happy with that, along with the highways access. I think that's possibly quite dangerous as well. So I would support what others have said so far.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Tilbury.
Yeah, I certainly agree with much of what's been said. I think it's not a bad design, but if you could push it back about 50 feet, I think there wouldn't be a problem with the design. But I think the access, I mean, the highways have made it clear. And I think it would be very irresponsible of us to ignore that, because it's always saying that there hasn't been an accident yet. But if there is an accident now, who's going to get the blame? Well, whoever was stupid enough to pass it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tilbury. I have a proposer and seconder. Yes, too.
Sorry, Chair, just one point of clarification. Listening to the debate, it appeared that Councillor Bound was potentially expanding the reason for refusal in relation to the size of the dwelling with regards to its proportions to the plot width, and I believe that was picked up by Councillor Westbrook. So just seeking clarification as to whether, before the vote, members would seek to amend that reason for refusal where it refers to the footprint. It could say related to the size of the plot if that picked up on what the members' view was. But I'm just seeking that clarification, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bound.
That's my view, yes, and I think it was picked up by Councillor Westbrook. I don't know whether he agrees with
that. So we have a proposer and seconder for refusal. Those in agreement, raise your hand. Those against? Abstain? Neither. That vote is carried. Thank you. And Catherine, would you sum up? Thank you.
Just to clarify, that item has been refused as per the reasons for refusal within the agenda, with the amendment as discussed with relation to the width of the plot. Thank you.
We now move to item 5, which has been cancelled, and onward to item 6, which is Elm Cottage, Borghurst Road, Borghurst. And I have speaking Mr. Dance in support, and Councillor Bound, you will be speaking, will you? Yeah, okay. And it'll be introduced by Catherine Fitzherbert Green. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is for the erection of a two-storey side rear extension and an extension of an existing conservatory to the property. If I draw members' attention first to the update paper, where there's just comment from the viewing panel held last Friday, an update on the planning policy situation, and in relation to this particular application, some further information as requested by members on the viewing in relation to the property dimensions and the percentage increases from the original property, its later extensions, and to the current proposal. For the benefit of members who weren't at the viewing panel, I would just draw members' attention to the elevations shown on page 147 of your agenda, which in the reproduction have been sort of squashed, which make the property appear out of proportion. I would therefore refer members to the slides in front of you, which are actually a better representation of actually what is being proposed. This application is recommended for refusal for two reasons, as per page 140 of your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Mr. Dance. Sorry? Councillor Bound, you wish to speak? Councillor Bound, you want to speak now?
Yes, I might as well, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
I brought this matter to committee along with Councillor Tate because whilst I think we recognise that this is a substantial extension to the dwelling, compared to perhaps the one in Bramley that we've just made a decision on, the plot here is quite a considerable plot. The extension is predominantly to the rear of the property, where it is not going to be viewed. There is a path going up the side that you can see sort of going off towards the letter A and N of plan, which is shrouded by the garage, which is already in position. So I think that view, there's not going to be much of a view. As you can see, there's a fence here on the left-hand side. Anybody passing down the road is not really going to really see the extension going backwards. There's fields behind. Coming up the road, there is hedge and trees and whatnot, and I don't think it's going to be seen from there either. So the front view of the property, which I think is the one that is perhaps the view that perhaps the people of Borghurst would like to see retained, that is the one with the little porch there and the two front windows. Coming past that view is not going to be affected whatsoever. The extension is at the back of the property and only sort of pokes out to the side a little bit. So whilst I do accept that it is a substantial extension, I can't agree that with the officer's comments, but this, I suppose, is a sort of a subjective view, and I'll wait and see what's going to happen with the rest of the members.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions for Councillor Bound? Yes, Councillor Leeks.
Just for a matter of interest and location, is this the old Kent's Coaches place?
Thank you. Right. No more questions to officers? Councillor Westbrook, followed by Councillor Taylor, followed by Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, that's one of the reasons for refusal, and in the absence of Councillor Tucker, I've mentioned the bats, because I'm sure she would have done if she was here. We've, on page 144 of the report, it mentions that the biodiversity officer's findings, and it said that they're entirely contrary to the findings of the ecologist who provided the initial report. Therefore, further clarification is required. And I believe we were told that on site on Friday as well, that we would get more information on the bat situation. So that was my first question, really.
In terms of any further information, I don't have any other update for you. No further satisfactory information has been received, hence why that reason for refusal is still before you this evening.
Right. Councillor Taylor next. Councillor Bound, I'll put you down too.
Could I just clarify on the second reason for refusal, which is the unsatisfactory design? Is that just purely because of its size in relation to the original building, or is there anything that the officer would object to with the actual design? I mean, I began to agree when I saw these rather squashed-in little dormers, but I realised that they're not like that at all. So is it purely the bulk?
It is looking at the bulk massing, the size of it in relation to the character of that original cottage. So when you look at the elevations that you had before, originally the property is quite a modest, quite characterful property. It has been extended, and it is felt that this further extensions, these further alterations are just taking it just away from its original character, its original form, its original context. It's a modest property on a large plot, has already been extended. It's just elongating that property further and further into the depth of the site. That's the concern.
Councillor Miller.
I might be substituting for Councillor Marilyn Tucker tonight, but I was going to raise the bat issue anyway, off my own bat. I was a little concerned, and I'm sorry about the pun, when I read the biodiversity paragraphs in here. Correct me if I'm wrong, but all I found in here was that there were numerous gaps in the parts of the roof, the soffit boards and everything else that could be used. There's no evidence in here there are any bats in the area. Now, I would think there are many, many properties around that would have access points for bats. I think we probably, a lot of us living in our own houses would probably have access points for bats. But am I not correct that there has to be evidence of bat activity to use this as an argument? Because I'm sorry, if I've missed it in this text, I apologise. But is there evidence of bat activity? Because I couldn't really find it in the text.
In response, I would bring your attention to the reason for refusal, that there's insufficient information. So we actually need that further information to establish whether or not bats are actually using that property. So although there's access points for bats, and bats can get into very small gaps, because they are a European protected species, we need to make sure and establish whether or not those bats, if there are bats in there, are likely to be disturbed, and also if there are bats using that building, what species of bats they are, in order to be able to ensure appropriate mitigation relevant to that different species or whatever species may be identified. The only way to do that is actually establish whether bats are coming in and out of the building at the appropriate times of the year. So of course when they're in hibernation we can't undertake that survey work. So hence why we need that information to be able to go that next step to ensure that that European sort of requirement has been satisfied.
Then I would ask the question, you're using, and this is maybe my strange logic, you're using that lack of information as a reason for refusal and not placing that as a condition if we came back to say, have the right argument and the right proposals that, notwithstanding the bulk and the extension of the building itself, with that accepted, could that extra information be placed as a condition upon this particular application?
I do know where you're coming from, and I would refer you to page 144 on the third paragraph down, where it refers that there is case law, and this is High Court case law, that determines such information cannot be secured by condition, hence why it is put as a reason for refusal before you this evening, and there are numerous appeal cases where that has been upheld by inspectors. Hence why we look for that approach first, and it cannot be secured by condition.
Thank you very much. I think I'm now quite clear about that, and for the benefit of probably some people around the table as well. Going on to while I've got the microphone, Chair, I heard what you said in response to Councillor Taylor's question, but the character of the building, and I think I'm referring back to Councillor Bound's comments as well, that epitomises the original structure, that particular photograph. Now, from what I can see on the drawings, the ones that you put up, because I appreciate the squishiness of some of the drawings, if that particular view is maintained and the rest of the extension is towards the back, I submit to you that maybe the character of the cottage as in its original state is actually maintained from the street scene. Could you agree with me on that?
I'm afraid I would refer you to the report. When you look at the elevations in front of you, you are looking straight on at the front of the property. However, as you will have noted from the photos, you do get oblique views from the north and the south across the plot, so you would get that impression of the property extending and detracting from that original front elevation. Hence why the reason for refusal before you this evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bound, followed by Councillor Potter.
Can I go back to the bats again, please? I mean, we've got one expert opinion. The applicant has had a bat survey from an organisation that I think is recognised as being as having expertise in this area, and they say there is no sign of bats. And not only that, I've seen somewhere, heard somewhere, that they couldn't see what the officer on the site said were these openings that bats could get into. That aside, can we actually pass this application then if we're infringing some sort of European directive?
The information that we've had submitted, obviously there's a conflict of professional opinion. We have had the information submitted by the applicant indicating or suggesting there aren't bats in the property, but your biodiversity officer sits contrary to that view, and therefore hence why we're asking for that phase 2 survey. That will confirm absolutely whether or not bats are using that property. Now, in terms of passing the application, as I said, we can't condition that information to be submitted at a later date. That we could look at an alternative recommendation in which we await the information to be submitted to us, and we would have to reconsult the biodiversity officer in order to ensure that information is satisfactory, should you not agree with the second reason for refusal.
It seems as though, from what you're saying, is that we've got a clash of opinions, and as it's down here as a reason for refusal, and bats were found and it was built, then I think we'd be in trouble. Can we defer this matter to another date until we get ask for the applicant to come back with an updated bat survey?
Chair, obviously deferral is an option. I would suggest possibly a more workable option would be if, depending on members' view on the other reason for refusal, the refusal regarding the design, if, for argument's sake, that was felt to be inappropriate and approval was sought, then I think the resolution would be to approve subject to that additional information coming in prior to a decision being issued, as has been done on previous cases. So it's not a planning condition because it's not on the decision notice, but it's information in prior to a decision being issued, and that effectively the committee delegates the further consultation with the biodiversity officer to officers. If that is then acceptable to the biodiversity officer with any additional conditions as may be required, that would be a mechanism by which that issue could be overcome. But as reported as of now, that information clearly isn't there, hence the reason for refusal as stated.
Well, as at this moment, I would like to move approval, but it sounds as though it's then got to be with the option to defer. Is that what I'm... Is that, can I say that? On the bat question.
Sorry, if I would suggest if you're moving approval, i.e. you're satisfied with the planning application, it's only the bat issue that you're concerned about, then I think it would be approval with the resolution to state that the applicant is required to submit further information to address the bat reason for refusal, with that consultation with the biodiversity officer then delegated to officers, and subject to that being acceptable to the biodiversity officer with any conditions, that the planning permission would then be granted.
That's the basis of my moving approval.
Thank you. Councillor Westbrook. No, Councillor Potter's next.
Sorry, Chair. Are we still debating this, obviously, in the context of the issues before us, both reasons 1 and 2? Yeah?
Yes.
I just wanted, if I may, to clarify with the officers the in terms of reason 2 given for refusal. Again, back to this stuff relating to disproportionate bulk and massing and footprint. In the first sentence of 2 in the reasons for refusal, it talks about would dominate and compete with the character of the original dwelling. Is that the original cottage that's being cited there in terms of that original dwelling? Because clearly, in terms of the history of this, there have been previous planning approvals in regard to the 2-storey extensions which have been approved and taken place, I think, and argued to be the completion, really, of the maximum that should be allowed. So we're not, in terms of the original cottage, it isn't reasonable, is it, to compare anything to that at this stage, because we've moved on from that stage, is that right?
Yes, I would agree with you there. I mean, we are looking at the original dwelling. Yes, do acknowledge there has been further extensions. It's how does this further enlargement compete with that original character?
Sorry, just coming back on that, it just seems to me, dare I say, a little bit misleading to be highlighting something as a comparison to the original dwelling, and the actual sizes of that I think are quoted somewhere, which were 9.1 in width and 6.1 metres in depth. Well, that was the history proper, but that clearly has changed subsequently, hasn't it? And now we're looking at further extensions to extensions which have already taken place, yeah?
I entirely take the point Councillor Potter's raised, and clearly there is a difference between original dwelling and host dwelling, depending on the current situation, if you like. I think the way it's phrased is specifically with regards to the character of the original dwelling, if you like, so it's picking up on the points I think other members have raised, which is if you look at the property, the character of the original dwelling, if you like, appears to be more around that front part and the simplicity of that design, but entirely acknowledge that things have moved on since and there's been extensions granted subsequent to that, which are now part of the appearance of the building.
Councillor Westbrook.
Mr. Chair, I mean, I would say that Councillor Bound's original comments in relation to the size of the property in relation to the size of the plot and previous applications this evening, I think, to me, he's hit the nail on the head with that. But having the benefit of the site viewing on Friday, I would say that extension, and when you're looking on page 146, the shaded area of the site plan, is not going to come up. There we are. I mean, it only just goes beyond the back of that garage, existing garage there. And when we stood on the plot, you could quite easily see that it would fit nicely into there, and it didn't seem to be out of place. And that would be my view. I couldn't see anything wrong with that, really.
Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Thought I'd just give an opinion here. I think it almost reads slightly strange now to talk about retaining the character of the original dwelling as if we're pretending that it's a modest cottage anymore. I mean, I think that ship sailed a long time ago. And it almost seems slightly strange now that we've kind of got a big building with a little cottage on the front of it now. I'd almost rather it could stretch out a bit sideways and not worry about such things. But in view of the fact that we've got before us what we have, I think I would say, yes, it is a massive extension, but it is a massive and very secluded site, which is borne out by the fact that nobody's objected to it. So I think my default would always be to give people what they want unless there's a good planning reason not to. Yes, I mean, I think I would support it.
Thank you, members. Now we have a proposer and seconder for approval, subject to the additional biodiversity, right? Those in favour, raise your hands. Those against? Those abstaining? No. Thank you. Would you sum up, please?
That application has been moved for approval, subject to the submission of further information and consultation to the biodiversity officer, and then subject to no objection being received, approval subject to conditions and informatives. And this is on the basis that the proposed additions and alterations are not detracting to the original character and are acceptable on this site. And if I just refer to members to the proposed conditions that we would use subject to the biodiversity information being acceptable, and this would be, let me get the right piece of paper. This will be looking for the application to be implemented within 3 years, for materials to be in keeping with the character and appearance of the property as detailed on the approved plans, and that the development be carried out in accordance with the approved plans, and also any further conditions that be required by the biodiversity officer. Thank you.
Good, thank you for that. Now we move to item number 7. Number 2, the plantation, Sheffield Green, Sheffield and Loddon. And I have speaking in support Mr Nardi and the Ward Councillor, Councillor Robinson again. And it will be introduced by Stephanie Humphreys.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the erection of a 2-storey side extension, single-storey front extension and rear extensions with alterations to create a new driveway. The application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions.
Thank you. Mr Nardi, you will have 4 minutes and I'll give you a minute's notice towards the end. Thank you.
Firstly, excuse me, I thank the committee for this opportunity to speak. The plantation consists of 1 semi of 3 pairs of houses facing Sherfield Green. The application site is situated within the village conservation area. As in many conservation areas, the diversity of buildings can vary. Some may be listed, perhaps 500 years old, others of less celebrated architectural significance, of more modern design. It is this irregularity that provides the character and enjoyment. Consultation has taken place with the conservation team. The case officer concludes the proposal is of a higher standard, respects the amenities of the neighbouring occupiers and preserves the character and appearance of the conservation area. Furthermore, the case officer considers the proposal to be an improvement and to enhance. The officer goes on to say that the break in the visual repetition of design is not to be considered harmful in itself. The application site is considered to be a significant distance from historic and notable buildings. This is as defined within the conservation area map. This set of properties forms part of an extremely diverse set of dwellings with very little cohesion. The 6 similar properties have varied visible outbuildings. It is intended to remove the concrete flat roof side linked addition. This comprises storage, an outside WC with covered passageway. These elements are typical of properties of this age and, in my opinion, not particularly attractive. The proposal retains the gaps between the properties. The new distance between the first floor elements of this number 2 and the adjoining number 3 amounts to some 7 metres. The two-storey section is subservient with a lowered roof ridge and front dormer window. This enhances the visual gap between the properties to avoid a terracing effect. The proposed single-storey front extension is no further forward than the current building line of outbuildings. Indeed, it is set back by some 600 millimetres. The applicant would realign the shared path serving numbers 1 and 2. The highway officer has no objection to the new gravelled access. Parking is more than adequate for the 3 required vehicle spaces. There are no side windows to the first floor side elevation. This will ensure the privacy of the adjoining owners. Some work has commenced on site. I visited the property on Monday and confirmed that no foundation work has been carried out. The building regulation application is current with this council's building control and under their supervision. I can additionally confirm that none of the works carried out would require planning permission. Indeed, the applicant is patiently awaiting the outcome of this meeting before committing to any further work. In conclusion, there are no officer objections. The proposal retains the gap between the properties and respects the amenities of the neighbours. The materials will match and respect those of the existing dwelling.
1 minute.
Thank you. The extensions are subservient and will enhance rather than detract from the street scene. I respectfully request the committee consider the application favourably. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nardi. Now, members, any questions for Mr. Nardi? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Nardi. I picked up on one little comment you made, and maybe either you'll educate me or my beliefs were right. You said the building line did not protrude past the building line of the outbuildings. It was my impression, and I've run across this in a couple of properties I've owned when I wanted to look for it, they look at the building line of the main property, not for outbuilding. Outbuildings didn't come into the equation. Could you clarify that for me, please?
Yes, I can clarify that. The building line I refer to currently is a single-storey flat-roofed extension. The proposed is also a single-storey extension. So we're replacing one with the other, apart from the fact that instead of having a concrete flat roof, it has a pitched roof. So in fact, it's set back further than the existing line of the single-storey extension. So with the proposed single-storey extension towards the front is further back than the existing single-storey extension line.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions, members? In that case, thank you, Mr. Nardi. Councillor Robinson. Four minutes, Councillor, with 1 minute's notice at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The plantation comprises of 6 identical semis at the heart of the Sherfield Conservation Area. They front onto the village cricket pitch and the village green. They are cited in the village character assessment prepared as part of the emerging NDP. The houses were built in the 1950s for farm workers and subsequently became council houses. One still remains a housing association house. They are considered by many to be one of the evocative views of the village. They have appeared on postcards and in village literature. They are at present unaltered. The houses are in a very prominent position, and how a large frontal extension can be described by the officer as preserving the conservation area is incomprehensible. The proposal will destroy the symmetry of the entire row and have a dramatic detrimental impact on the conservation area, which has listed buildings close by. Both myself and the parish council and many residents believe that these properties are visually important and an important part of the village scene and architectural heritage. Neither myself or the parish council or the immediate neighbours object to the principle of objecting this house, but consider the frontal aspect of this plan to be totally unacceptable. It's unfortunate that due to my holiday and the Easter break, I missed the deadline for the viewing panel. I ask the committee to refuse this application in its current form, or at least defer the decision and take the opportunity to view the site before the next DC meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions for Councillor Robinson, members? No? In that case, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions to officers, members? Councillor Westbrook?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think the most blindingly obvious question is, where's the Conservation Officer's report? That's what I would say quite clearly. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis put on this in the conservation area, and it seems very strange that there is no report at all, or at least an opinion.
Thank you, Councillor. For this application, the conservation team weren't consulted based on its small scale, household and nature. Not all applications are consulted to the conservation team. This was one that was felt could be determined as per the Development Management Officer's opinion, but obviously the relevant documents and SPDs were referred to in the officer report there.
Anyone else? No? Right. Let us go to debate. Councillor Miller.
Well, there was no viewing panel. I don't live very far from Sheffield. I happen to know it from just personal visitation, and it's right opposite the village green. And I think the photographs actually do it justice. You get the view from the village green, and it's typical of the 1950s structures that they are. If anything was going to be done to them, it should be done to each one of them, because it's a very symmetrical line. It's on a rising ground, as you can see from there, and they're fairly predominant. I don't think I need to use the word incredulous. I'm very surprised that the Conservation Officer hasn't actually submitted an opinion into this report. But just for looking around other conservation areas, and it's evident that this particular pattern of housing is representative of a particular era in the 1940s and the 1950s, and to have one of them singled out for what I consider to be an out-of-place series of works would completely despoil it from its view. We have some pretty awful examples of the way things have happened over the modern years, and this is an example where it would be very desirable to keep this selection of properties as they are, and especially within the conservation area, and especially as they're held close to the heart of a lot of people in Sheffield, the parish council as well. It just sets the scene, I think, is the expression. And I'm sorry, but I would move to refuse this on that basis, that it's totally inappropriate to have this kind of extension. I don't think it's a high standard of design anyway, given the context of the three pairs of properties.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. In view of the comments made by Councillor Robinson, who is after all the ward member, and also bearing in mind some of the remarks made by Councillor Miller, I would not wish to see a vote on refusal here, but I would like to suggest that it be deferred for a site visit, and also the Conservation Officer be asked to produce a report as well, giving his official view on the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Potter.
Sorry, Chairman. I don't know how we'll go on this one, obviously, depending on how people determine their vote. But I must admit, I probably make myself out to be a little bit of a Philistine here. But in regard to the officer's analysis, I mean, I have, I think, some support. I know the area. I didn't go on the viewing, I have to admit that, but I do know this area, and used to fall within Basingstoke Rural District Council when I worked for it many, many years ago. I'm normally somebody who's quite keen on symmetry, but in terms of the appearance of these dwellings, I genuinely don't think what's being proposed here would be harmful. And I certainly don't think that it actually would interfere with the gaps between these fairly generous garden boundaries which exist currently. And I think there would still be that visual gap between the properties which would not be harmed by this proposed variation and extension. So personally, I'm inclined to support the officer's view on this, but clearly if there's a recommendation to actually view the site, then that's going to be put to us and we'll determine our future action on this. But I'm inclined to support the officer's view.
Councillor Bayer, followed by Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I would support Councillor Goodiston, so we defer this before we have a site visit, and definitely we want to hear from the Conservation Officer.
Councillor Miller.
On that basis, Chair, I'm prepared to withdraw my particular motion for refusal, and I will certainly support the proposal made by Councillor Goodison. I think that's very worthwhile.
Right. We have a proposer and a seconder for deferment. And those in favour, raise your hands. Those against? Abstain? None. Thank you. Stephanie, will you sum it up? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the application will be deferred to the next available committee in order for the Conservation Officer to provide comment and to allow the members to view the site.
We now move to item number 8, which is land adjoining 27 Swan Street in Kingsclere. And I have speaking Frank Dowling and Mark Harrison in support, and Councillor Osselton. And Stephanie Humphreys will introduce it.
Thank you, Chair. This application is for the erection of a 2-bedroom dwelling following the demolition of the existing residential shed. Additional comments from the agent are summarised within the update paper, and the application is recommended for refusal.
Thank you. Frank Dowling and Mark Harrison. Thank you both. You will have 4 minutes between you, and you get a minute's notice at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members. Apologies that I was not able to attend the viewing panel on Friday. However, Mr Harrison here was there, and he's here now to answer any questions the members may have afterwards. The application site lies behind the Swan Public House, close to the centre of Kingsclere. It's within the local plan settlement policy boundary, where there's a presumption in favour of development, and it also falls just within the boundary of the Kingsclere Conservation Area. Currently, the site is occupied by a large, unattractive shed, which it is proposed to demolish. A shed does not accurately describe the building, having been used separately from the existing cottage, used for many years in the past commercially as a carpenter's workshop and also as a garage. There are some 6 objections to the proposed dwelling, mainly from the houses in Brimley Hill Court, which back onto the side of the site. The officer's report states that in terms of impact on these properties, it is considered to be acceptable within an established residential settlement. The proposed dwelling has been designed with no windows on the side elevation facing these houses in order to ensure that their privacy is maintained. The recommendation for refusal has just 2 reasons. The first relates to the setting of the listed building, that's 27 Swan Street, and to the Kingsclere Conservation Area, which it states would not be preserved because of the scale, form and design of the new dwelling.
The Conservation Officer had commented on the original application, which was for a larger 3-bedroom dwelling, that number 27 Swan Street is afforded an unusually large garden area, and that it may be possible to subdivide the plot in some form to facilitate a single property if an appropriate form and design can be agreed upon. Well, we withdrew that application, changed the design and reduced the size, but we could not agree with the Conservation Officer's suggestion to reorientate the dwelling to face north away from the access lane, as I explained, as is mentioned on the update sheet. This is a modest cottage of vernacular design. Details and external materials are all sympathetic to the existing cottage and to the established historic character of the conservation area. We do think it would preserve the character and still leave the listed building with a reasonable garden area. The second reason for refusal relates to highway matters. We have made clear through the submission of a land registry title document.
1 minute.
Thank you. That the site has an existing vehicular right-of-way and with an existing vehicular access serving the current building. This access does have good visibility both up and down the lane. We've shown a total of 4 car parking spaces with 2 new ones for the existing cottage and 2 for the new dwelling, which also has a proposed cycle shed. The standard provision for car parking spaces quoted in the Parking Standards SPD in rural areas is either 2 or 2.5. We think that the provision of 2 car parking spaces and cycle storage for this centre of Kingsclere site should prove more than adequate for this small 2-bedroom dwelling. We hope members will agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dowling. Members, any questions? Councillor Westbrook.
I've got a question for Mr. Harrison, if that's okay. On the site meeting on Friday, I've got written down here that the conservation area officer wants it pointing one way and the applicant would prefer it to be pointing the other way. Can you confirm to me which way is on the plan? Is that the applicant's position?
The cottage faces south onto the lane itself.
That's your applicant's view.
That's our view, yes.
Any more questions? No? Thank you both very much. Councillor Osselton next, please. Councillor, you will have 4 minutes and I'll give you a minute's notice at the end.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Kingsclere is in need of new homes, especially starter and elderly, and this new build will offer a small contribution to reducing our current deficit. The new build is designed in such a way that it will not have an adverse or harmful effect on the listed building some 40 metres to the east. Properties in the immediate vicinity have a mixed street scene and will therefore not contravene, as you said, the Town and Country Act 1990. In fact, it respects the amenities of neighbouring occupiers and preserves the character and appearance of the area. And I agree with what's just been said. I think the house does need to be situated onto the actual drive. With regard to the public footpath 86, the applicant assures me that he has vehicular access to his property where the proposed dwelling will sit, including the bank on the right. The building being demolished, to my understanding, was a workshop. I would say it looks more like a garage, and is on the land registry as such with vehicular right-of-way. Transport on this patch is minimal. I walk it quite a lot, and I've never seen anybody, in the 13 years I've been a ward councillor, I've never met anybody going up that road at all. It does not cause undue interference with safety or convenience of users to the lane. There is adequate provision on site for a car to turn, and Kingsclere has a half-hourly bus service to Basingstoke and an hourly service to Newbury. I would ask you please to approve this because the application complies with Policy A1, our Kingsclere design statement, Policy E3, and is not contrary to NPPF Section 66. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions, members, for Councillor Osselton? No? Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. I come back to looking at the text of the Conservation Officer. The one-liner in the heading obviously isn't enough, but if you look into the paragraph heading, impact on the character of the area and design, I have to ask in the first paragraph that the design, and I quote, the design of the proposal is not considered to be harmful to the character of the conservation area. So we've established that much. However, the close proximity of the proposed dwelling to the existing listed building, 14 metres away, which in terms of putting houses next to each other is quite a long way, is considered to have an adverse and harmful effect on its setting. How big is the setting of the listed building that we have to consider? It's as if this is defining a setting as a defined area around a particular listed building. Could you actually define that area, please?
Thank you, Councillor. So the setting at present is obviously the entire curtilage that's afforded to the listed building, and that's how it's read in its context at present. So the Conservation Officer feels that that is what is appropriate, that's what should be retained, that is what we're seeking to maintain in perpetuity. But I think what they're saying in terms of it wouldn't be out of context for the conservation area, that's elsewhere it might be appropriate, but in this proximity to the listed building it would compete with the host property, and that's their concern.
So just to be clear, no building at all can take place within the curtilage of the listed building, because that's essentially what you said. So that doesn't matter what the proposal is going to be, nothing can go into the setting of the listed building.
No, what I'm saying is that the current design, that is what the Conservation Officer has the concerns with. It might be that another design at a future point might be appropriate, but they're considering what's there right now. As with the withdrawn application that the applicant made reference to, they were both felt to be competitive to the hierarchy of buildings on the site. At present, obviously, it's a shed, and a two-storey dwelling of this footprint is considered to be significant.
Fair enough. You caught me out with the use of the word in perpetuity, because that means nothing goes on there. And no offer of another design or suggestion was made by the Conservation Officer as to what would be acceptable?
Not as part of this application, so that it was considering what's before them and making minor adjustments if that would be appropriate, but obviously they felt that nothing could be achieved to this current scheme that would be appropriate to condition or seek amended plans, so it wasn't suggested.
Thanks, Chair.
Any more questions, members? Councillor Tilbury.
There seems to be some confusion over the rights of way over the access, a bit like the Whitchurch one last week. But the applicant's saying at the site in which I wasn't able to attend that they do have access to that on the land registry there, whereas officers are saying that's not the case, and the parish council is saying the same. So could someone clarify what we believe the situation is? Because obviously they're rather contradictory, what it says in the report, what it says in the update.
Councillor, the application there was a consultation sent to the county council countryside office who deal with rights of way. Unfortunately, we haven't had a comment from them, and they could still determine this better than I could. But helpfully, they've provided a copy of the registered title, and it says on here that specifically to 27 Swan Street, there's a claimed benefit of right of access with or without vehicles to the land. The concern is that if the new dwelling is built, then that won't be 27 Swan Street, it'll be a new address. And that's not what's in front of us in the registry document.
Councillor Potter.
Sorry, I do beg your pardon. Can I just be clear about our locus on these matters, you know, in terms of what our material planning consideration regarding access? When it comes to some of these covenants and rights of way, the type of thing that's being mooted here, some of that doesn't fall within our brief, does it really, in terms of the way the applicant is entitled to describe the application that's before us is one thing, and providing that such things as, obviously, the car parking spaces, the vehicle access proper, can satisfy the standards we're looking at. In terms of ownership and right of access over things which may be governed by other covenants and like that, isn't entirely within our brief, is it?
Thank you, Councillor. With respect to access to the site, we have to be sure that that private right of access, whether it's pedestrian or vehicular, would actually be extended to a new property and not just the existing. So we need to be clear that access to the site is going to be achieved, and not approving a dwelling that you couldn't get a car up to that parking area. So notwithstanding the on-site parking and visibility issues, it hasn't been proved that access for a new dwelling and vehicles visiting that dwelling would be unrestricted. So that's why that refusal reason's on there.
Sorry, can we move to debate, please? And I would just like to say that I am very supportive of this building, and I also think it's quite straightforward to face it to the south as opposed to the north. Do I have any more comments from anyone? Any proposals? Councillor Taylor.
I would say I agree with you. I mean, obviously we can't comment on the access because HCC haven't come back about it. What can we do? It's being used as a garage now anyway, so I can't imagine that there'd be any problem at all. It's a perfectly neat house, and I can't imagine that it would be too detrimental to the fairly small listed building that's just near it. And I would be in support of this as well.
Thank you. Any more? Councillor Westbrook.
Some clarification, please, Chair. I mean, if we were minded to approve it and then it was found you couldn't get to it, what happens then?
That is the issue that we're considering, is that the private access for a new dwelling hasn't been demonstrated to the highways officer, so we can't have that confidence that it would extend to a new dwelling. So the situation would be potentially that you'd have a house that you can't get vehicular access to along the footpath.
Well, it sort of reminds me of the bat situation, really, that we had earlier. I don't see how you can make a decision if, in that case.
But they're accessing it now already.
Subject to, yeah, I suppose you could do that, I guess.
I mean, they've got access, they're accessing it. Yes, Councillor Goodison.
Thank you, Chair. Am I not correct in thinking that this is a legal matter and not a planning matter? I mean, I'm told, I may be completely wrong, that somebody, if they wished to do so, could put in an application to build a block of flats in my garden without my even being aware of the fact that such an application was going in, and that's perfectly legitimate. So I just thought, surely this is a legal matter, and if we were to approve, and then it turns out that he hasn't got access to, then he can't build a bloody thing. It's as simple as that.
Councillor Westbrook.
I'd like to counter that, Chair. I mean, if we only had one entrance to Manydown and we went ahead and built it, and we couldn't get to it, I don't know what would happen then. So, just
Mr. Townsend.
Thanks, Chair. Hopefully I can help. I don't think the issue here is ownership per se, so I don't think it's the sort of situation where it's simply who owns the lane. It's the fact that it's a public right of way, so the potential harm identified is a potential interference with the users of that right of way. I think if members are otherwise satisfied with the application, I do think it would require that consultation response back from the right of way officer prior to any decision being issued to understand whether the asserted vehicular right of way does exist or not. because I think that is a key element of this application. So that could be an option for the resolution, that it be subject to that consultation response being received and confirming that vehicular access does exist. Otherwise, the application will be returned to committee for determination.
Councillor Goodison.
Purely as a matter of interest, would I be right in assuming, in view of what you've said, that if we were to grant approval and the owner of number 27 decided to build it and move into it himself and get rid of the other one, then he would have the right to go up to it because he's already got the right to use that access point?
I just come back and say on the title register it does afford the right of access to the property and not to the owner. So the right of access is to 27 Swan Street, obviously any outbuildings, but it doesn't pass on to a new address irrespective of the ownership or occupation.
Councillor Potter.
Sorry. Well, I just think, as usual, Mike Townsend's advice is sound, really, in this matter. I mean, I think we know what we want to do, but it has to be conditioned in that way, subject to the further commentary of highways and the establishment, I think, really, of the legal position regarding the right-of-way. And, I mean, we can, if it's the mood of the committee, approve this application subject to that restraint, and I think that's the way we want to move forward, or that's the feeling I get, anyway.
Thank you.
And I'd move that if nobody else wants to.
I'm happy to second it, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, I have a proposer.
Chair, to just in terms of capturing potential reasons for approval, if that is the vote that's to be taken, it's with regards to there not being an adverse impact on the setting of the listed building or the conservation area, and the impact of the dwelling being considered acceptable in terms of the overall character of the area. But the resolution is subject to further consultation with the Hampshire Rights of Way officer and confirmation and establishment of vehicular access rights to the property to overcome the highway's reason for refusal, albeit that there are obviously other aspects of that reason for refusal.
Thank you, Mike. I have a proposer and a seconder for approval. Those in favour, raise your hands. I'm going to vote this time. It's overwhelming. Those against? Abstentions? None. That vote is carried. Conditions, please, Stephanie.
Thank you, Chair. So it's recommended that the application is deferred for approval at a later date, subject to the receipt of suitable information in terms of the right of access to the proposed property, and the suggested conditions would be that it's carried out in accordance with the approved plans, that it should be begun within 3 years, that samples of the materials to be used externally on the dwelling and outbuildings should be submitted and approved, that no development should take place until a construction method statement has been submitted, that no work should take place until adequate visibility displays are demonstrated and approved by the highways team, that parking for 2 vehicles should be provided on site, refuse and recycling storage should be provided on site, same with secure cycle parking, and that details of boundary treatments should be submitted to and approved prior to commencement, and that no deliveries should be undertaken outside of the hours of 7:30 to 6 o'clock Monday to Friday, the standard hours on weekends and bank holidays, and the same for works to the property as well as the deliveries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Right, now we move to item number 9. 4 Limekiln Cottages, Limekiln Cottage Lane, Old Berkeley. And I have to speak Greg Hurst for the applicant, and it will be introduced by Rob Sims.
Thank you, Chair. Last item of the evening, application at 4 Limekiln Cottages, Limekiln Cottage Lane, Old Berkeley. Proposal for the erection of a single-storey rear extension following demolition of existing porch. Construction of replacement bay window to the front of the property. Only a short update for you about the planning policy implications for this proposal, which is nothing, and reasons for approval. Application recommended for approval, subject to the conditions within the agenda papers.
Thank you, Rob. Right, Mr. Hurst, you have 4 minutes, and I'll give you a minute's notice towards the end.
Thank you. Good evening to all. My name is Greg Hurst. I am here to ask for your support and grant permission for my family to carry out the proposed works which have been both submitted to and recommended approval by Basingstoke Borough Council Planning Department. I have highlighted the supporting evidence from the report which I feel addresses the objections that have brought the application before you today. First, I would like to draw your attention to the extra effort made to create a suitable design which considered both the terrace surroundings and any impact on neighbouring dwellings for incorporating the additions of sensitive materials and dimensions. We also took advantage of the pre-application service which was determined by John Willits, one of the conservation officers, being that we live in an area of outstanding natural beauty, and the terraces are also listed as of historical interest. During this consultation, several changes were made to the design and materials at the suggestion of the planning officer, one of these being the change of the roofing material to the rear extension. This is in an email on record from our agent stating that we are happy to use a slate roof, flat roof, or the steel roof on the drawings you have in front of you. Despite the planning officer's recommending approval, we are reliant upon your decision today to allow us to develop our property. We ask that you support the application on the grounds that the planning report firmly emphasises its approval based on its suitable design, materials and dimensions. We understand that there have been several objections with respect to its size, materials and proximity to neighbours' property, but as before mentioned, we have carried out all available measures to overcome this. If I can just add to this, the original 2 Victorian terraces of 6 cottages each have been altered extensively since they were first built, with concrete roof tiles, UPVC windows, bay windows and rear extensions, mostly without formal approval. Some properties are in... this microphone's difficult to speak to, sorry. Some properties are in a poor state of repair. The only major part remaining of the Victorian facade is the facing brickwork. The parish council also raised the point of an existing garden shed in the rear garden which is immaterial when considering this application, should not form part of this planning application decision. The bay window replaces a similar sized bay window which has a much more attractive roof and modern high performance construction. There is, in fact, another bay window on the front of number 6 of similar size with a modern patio door formed from UPVC. However, I would like to address 3 main concerns raised by the Parish Council's objections and our neighbours. Its size, the impact on the area of outstanding natural beauty and the materials chosen for construction. With respect to the rear extension, as the report acknowledges, page 3, under the impact on the character, the officer addresses the fact that many of the properties have been changed in various forms and various manners with various materials without permission in many cases. This therefore suggests that our design is both suitable in choice of materials and dimensions based on the number of other already existing extensions to the terraces. Again, this is strongly supported by the planning officer's report on page 4, second part, paragraph 2. Furthermore, the extension with its timber structure would sit parallel to an existing extension to the adjoining property, which is additionally timber-clad, with the proposed materials not appearing, out of keeping in the local area.
Now, please, your time is up. Right, do we have any questions for Mr. Hurst, anyone? No? Thank you, Mr. Hurst. Questions to officers, members? Do we have any of those? Councillor Taylor.
Could I just ask one question? The applicant said that he'd had discussions with John Willits about, and John had advised about what materials to use, etc., and he was okay with it. Is that correct, please?
Yeah, that was in the pre-app discussion. It's similar to the application at Plantation. So again, of this scale development, it's not in a conservation area, it's in the AONB. They are unlisted properties, but on the local list. So it wouldn't usually warrant a consultation with a planning application. But as you can see, the kind of a justification goes on about where we find these materials acceptable is that there's a range of materials along existing buildings along there. Yeah.
Any more questions to officers? No? Right. Debate. Councillor Leeks.
I have no problem in proposing the recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you for that. Councillor Miller.
I'll second that.
Thank you, and Councillor Goodison too. Right, I have a proposal and a seconder for approval. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? The motion is carried. Robert, will you...
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The application is approved in accordance with subject to the conditions outlined on page 173.
Thank you, members. As there's no number 10, it's been taken off. We've completed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you and good evening.